you must feel like you're always looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can take a bit of a chance. It's unlikely to change very much. But then there are other areas going, can you please tell us a little bit more about, this area of the car? Because we really need to squeeze something in.
Our strategy is just to try to keep our nose ahead, and we just have to ride out these scary events where other people bring all their fancy new bits.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the New Silver Arrows radio show from here in Brackley. I'm pleased to say we're joined by Technical Director James Allison and also dialing in remotely from Brixworth via WhatsApp, Managing Director of HPP, Hywel Thomas. High performance powertrains, not power units. That almost always catches me out, but not this time. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you all doing? We're here to talk about the mid-season point of the championship and the run-up to that point. Let's start with you first, James. 72 points in the lead of the Constructors Championship, 50 points in the lead of the Drivers Championship. Satisfied?
It feels a bit churlish to say this, but probably not as much as I would wish to be.
I knew you were going to say that. Why did I know you were going to say that?
I mean, clearly, if you'd offered it me at the start of the year, I'd have taken it a bit in your hand off. But given the weapon we've had, it's, we really should have more points than we have, given the level of competitiveness we've enjoyed. And so I think all of us are feeling a bit of frustration there, and are looking forward to the second half of the year where hopefully we can put some of that right.
And over to you, Hywel, over at Brixworth. How's it been from your point of view, HPP? You haven't just got one team to supply power units to, you've got 4 teams. Does that create even more pressure for you? And are you satisfied with where you are so far this year?
I don't think it really creates more pressure for us. We know what we've been supplying multiple teams for a long time. We know how to do that, and we get lots of learning from that. In terms of the situation we're in terms of the point situation, then very similar to what James has just described. We know that there are some points left on the table. We know some of that's because of our reliability, and we know we need to put that right if we want to continue to win races and continue to stay at the top of the tables.
It's great having you two here because as a simple driver myself, I'm always fascinated to know how, especially when you have such a massive rule change in Formula One, how chassis and power unit come together and create this magic that we have this year. I don't know if you, start with you, James. From a team's point of view here in Brackley, how does it all begin? What are the first processes before, when you first get the rules come your way?
Well, you've definitely started in the wrong place asking me. Simply because the chronology of getting ready for this a very, very challenging year, it was definitely a thing led in power unit land. The rules were firmed up way earlier for the power units than for the chassis. So probably actually best off starting in Hywel land for the beginning of the journey, and then I can chip in at the death. All right, then. Where we started to have an impact.
Over to you then, Hal.
First of all, there was a big part of this which was helping to create the regulations with the FIA, and that wasn't an entirely straightforward process because you've got a number of different teams, a number of different things that need to be created. There was a big push to get new manufacturers into the sport, and so there were a lot of different stakeholders who all kind of were looking for slightly different things from the regulations. So even before you kind of get the regulations set, there's quite a lot that needs to be thought about, and you're trying to kind of second guess how it might all end up as you're trying to do a little bit of work yourselves. Once the regulations have got set up there, I think what I've said on a number of occasions, and the way that we really always try to work, is to look at the regulations and really try and understand where's the lap time going to come from. what's the specifics of these regulations that you can do the work on? Where are you going to? You've only got a certain amount of, to use one of James's sayings, you've only got a certain amount of treasure, and you've got to spend it wisely. And especially with this set of regulations, where it was the first time we had a cost cap, so you've got to make sure you're spending your treasure, spending your resource, spending your cash in the right place to make sure that the lap time is always being looked after. So that was the first thing, is just on the computer, and some quite simple simulations done on spreadsheets. Nothing more complicated than that. Trying to work out, wait a minute, what's the real points where we need to make sure that we really look after well. That's kind of where we started.
So that's it from Mercedes high performance powertrain side of things, HPP. So then once you have that information, I guess, James, then when does the chassis side start?
Well, so all of what Hywel just described, that preceded anything chassis land by a couple of years. The chassis rules were not even a twinkle in the eye of the FIA at the point where the horse trading was going on for what the PU was going to eventually turn into. We could see quite early on that this PU rule set was going to need to produce a very different chassis because of the way the 50-50 hybrid works. And the FIA were giving some very, very arm-waving sort of indications of the direction of their thought. But that was not really crystallizing into regulation until mid-2025, and with some ideas in 2024. So in 2024, 2 years before the things launch, we're still joining in the fun with HPP, because the sort of packaging constraints that the PU is going to give to the chassis start to become clearer, and we can express some aspirations of, could you just maybe think about tucking in that there, because maybe that would be a good thing to do in the future. And equally, hearing back from them the sort of heat rejection figures we're going to need to accommodate, so we can at least have an idea of the type of radiator sizing that's going to go with this. But actual having an idea of how to start laying out the chassis is really a 2025 task, because that was the first point where the regulations were mature enough to do something with.
It's interesting, hearing that explains why in the simulator, because I was hard at work in there before the race drivers ever thought to turn their attention to prepare themselves for this season, and it did seem to be very much in its infancy. The car felt very much almost unbelievably low grip and primitive in the sim. So that completely kind of relates to me,
By regulation, we were not allowed to do any wind tunnel testing or CFD work other than some very controlled snippets of work that were to help support the foundation of the regulations. We're not allowed to do any development of our car aerodynamically until the 1st of January in 2025. And from that point forward, it really gathers pace. But up until then, at a point which you're probably going 3 years by then, Hal? Something like that.
Yes, absolutely.
We're only really joining in the party full strength by the time you get to there.
We were having to do a lot of work. We were having to make lots of decisions around what the PU was going to be. We're talking to James and the guys over at Brackley, and they're kind of going, well, we don't really know. But we're having to make decisions. We're having to make those decisions jointly with trying to keep ourselves as flexible in the right places where we could be, but trying to tie down areas where we thought there was, little chance that, you can already start to think about the spine of the car. You can start thinking about some of the mounting points of things and think, okay, we can take a bit of a chance. It's unlikely to change very much. But then other areas going, no, we were going, can you please tell us a little bit more about, this area of the car? Because we really need to squeeze something in. And what we were getting back was, well, no, we don't really know. And that became there was quite a bit of horse trading going on there, James, I think.
Yeah, it was tricky because the two projects were by regulation very, very out of phase, and happily there was decisions taken in 2024 with extremely incomplete information that have played out well for both of us. So there was some good judgments made on both sides of these two companies when we were just guessing.
But it did play out well. You arrived in Melbourne and scored a 1-2 immediately, and it was proof that all of that hard work was coming to fruition and set you on this path to where we are now in the championship. What was the feeling like in the camp in Australia? I mean, how you were on the podium between the two drivers come the end of the race. Did you ever imagine that it would be, in a way, that dominant, the car and power unit package there?
You can imagine it could go that well. You can imagine it can go that well. We've done it in the past, but I think we'd have all been churlish to think that we just needed to turn up and do that. You know, the track testing we done didn't really suggest we'd be quite that dominant. We knew we could be up at the front end, but I don't think it really suggested that dominance. And of course, all the way through, you're just all the way through. There's several years there where we really had no idea what our competitors were doing, and even through track testing, you don't really know what your competitors are doing. And so it is a time of really being quite concerned about, you know, how are you going to turn up and how is that first event going to go. So for it to have gone as well as it was just an incredible feeling.
I think this team had the great good fortune of making a good job of the 2014 regulation shift, and for several years we have been telling the story internally, you know, to each other, that the 2026 regulation shift is of a magnitude that the team that gets it right could be set fair for several seasons, not just for a race or two, and that we should do everything in our power to try to make sure that we land well with the new rules. And so we've been telling ourselves that story for a number of years, with increasing intensity as we get closer to the finishing line of developing the car and launching it, and which is of course the starting line of the new regulations. And then to actually arrive in Melbourne with a car that was clearly a decent effort was a very, very affirming and satisfying feeling. But given the story we told each other in the run-up, you might sort of think, well, we've done it, but you don't actually feel that. You just feel like, well, thank goodness, now there's a race in 2 weeks, or, you know, that we've got to do it all again. And honestly, from the start of this year until here we are, ahead of a break that I think all of us have been longing for, it's just been just running from one event to the next, trying to make sure that we don't drop the ball, and trying to make good on the investments we've made, but not at any point yet feeling like we're living out the story we told ourselves. I mean, in the run-up.
But this is Formula One. This is what it's all about. And from, say, like my TV side, I get to see maybe an even broader picture of all of the teams, and my eyes are up and down the grid from the top to the bottom. And it's absolutely incredible watching everyone's progress at different points, not just from a chassis side, aerodynamically, but also from a power unit point of view as well. The reliability concerns, but the teams leapfrogging each other, and it kind of, you're fighting teams that are equally as capable, have all the same kind of materials and factory powers behind them to make these developments in their cars. And you must feel like you're always looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, absolutely. Or in the case of the last race, looking ahead by, only by a heartbeat, but we were looking ahead. And one of the interesting things about this season is that these are very, very young rules, and they're young in the power unit land. They are very young on the chassis side. Aerodynamically, the gain rate, for each passing week in the wind tunnel, the amount of lap time we find, that's the gain rate, is about 6 to 7 times what it was last year.
Wow.
So it's about half a second every 2 months, something like that. So that's really, really steep. And we did everything in our power to launch a car at the start of the year that was going to be strong. And, thank goodness it was a fair effort. But one of the things about our development strategy was we took a decision internally on the aerodynamic side and on the bodywork side of the car that we were going to leave it later than we've ever left a car before by several weeks, and that we were going to do a plan that had less than no contingency in it, and as a result of that plan, we got as much, that very, very steep development slope, we got as much of that steep development slope in the first car at the first race as I think was humanly possible to get in there. And we emptied everything out to do that. Other teams maybe didn't arrive with quite the sort of, quite such a late breaking,
close to the wire,
close to the wire result. And as a consequence, they updated their car sooner because they fixed their car earlier in time. They then were developing the first upgrade to arrive sooner in the season. So we arrived, bristling with performance, but with all of it spent. And then we've been filling up our tanks to give more, and we're a bit out of phase. And our development program, as a result of arriving early, is now running a race or two after the update rates of the others. And it appears, looking at the lap times we're seeing, that everyone's on this same slope we're on. Everyone is developing around about half a second every two months, and so with that, being out of phase half a step with the development cycle means that you can have half a second like we did at the start of the year, and one development cycle will bring that to nothing. And that feels quite scary, but also you know that there's a load in the tank. It's just a question of when we're going to bring our bits. And our strategy is just to try to keep our nose ahead and to make sure that the next lump of performance that we deliver will restore the status quo ante, restore the goodness we put in at the beginning of the season. And we just have to ride out these scary events where other people bring all their fancy new bits.
That makes an awful lot more sense to me, because that's what you see from the outside, this leapfrog process going on. So that completely clears it up in my mind. And how from an engine manufacturer, power unit manufacturer's point of view there at HVP, I know that there are these opportunities of allowances of upgrades through the year. Can you just explain how that works, that process, the additional development upgrade opportunities, or ADUO that we call them? How does that work? And have you had any upgrades at all this year so far?
So the baseline position is that you have got an homologated power unit, so no opportunity to do hardware development. That's the baseline position. One of the things with this regulation set is that with the 50/50 combustion engine and ERS, that energy management is a much bigger thing, and there's a lot more scope for lap time gain through energy management. And so we can develop that. It's not a hardware thing. It's changing software, it's changing settings, it's changing the way that you use the engine. And we can keep developing that through the year, and we have done. And there's been some really good work done. And if you look at the sophistication of our energy management at this point, in comparison to where we were, sort of in the first couple of tests in Bahrain, or even the first race in Australia, it's very different. And you will know that because you've driven it.
Oh yeah, seen a lot of improvements.
That stuff goes on, and that stuff will continue to go on, and there is real genuine lap time in that. So that the PU is adding into what James has described as those upgrades. The ADUO is something a little bit different. The ADUO is an opportunity to develop the combustion engine, and it's just the combustion engine, not the system. Well, sorry, no, that's a lie. It's measured on just the combustion engine. You can develop whatever you want once you've got the token. And what this was originally put into the regulations for was in case somebody didn't do a great job, in case somebody, for whatever reason, got caught out, in case somebody missed something in the regulations, and if you had no opportunity to develop your hardware, you could be stuck like that for a year. And so there was to give everyone, okay, a bit of a chance. If that happened, then there should be some kind of safety net to allow you to try and catch up. That turned into ADUO, and what that is it's meant to be after every 6 races, slightly complicated this year because of the missing a couple of races, but if we stick with every 6 races, the FIA, who have sensors on the car that can measure the power from the power unit, there's an assessment made, and if you are a number of percentage points below what is deemed to be the benchmark, then you get some additional dyno hours, you get some additional cash, and you get the additional opportunity to do some hardware development during the season, and in fact also adding to next season.
Thanks so much, Hal. That really sums it up nicely. James, from your side, moving forward now, I'm excited to see how the competition carries on through the second half of the season. What do you envisage happening? And you can, like we said before, you can never underestimate the competition.
It's going to be interesting. Every Formula One team always faces the dilemma of when should you switch off your efforts on the current car and invest in next year. And when the development rate is as steep as it seemingly continues to be, that decision gets more difficult, because if you switch off too early and your competitors continue to develop at 1/4 of a second a month, then the world can get a bit itchy in the final third of the season or whatever. Our job is to try to judge that switch off point correctly, and to make sure that we keep performance coming to the track at a rate that is going to allow us to, on average, stay with our noses in front of this sort of leapfrogging that we were talking about a few minutes ago. I think the odds are good for us that we will be able to do that, because I know what the wind tunnel's already produced, and I know what's sitting in the wings and will eventually make its way to the track. And I think that that there's a strong amount of performance available there, and we've got a certain amount of points on the board already. So we collectively want to make sure that we deliver all of those upgrade opportunities smoothly, cleanly, effectively to the track, and that, just as importantly, and in fact arguably more so, that we make sure that the second half of the season is untroubled by reliability errors and sort of self-inflicted wounds in that have been too prevalent in the first half of the year, because actually that is going to be far more of a factor.
More costly, perhaps, in the second half, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a really good upgrade season, it will swing the points one way or another by, 10, 15 points, 20 maybe if depending on your assumption. But one DNF is that in one go. So I think our focus will be trying to make sure that we really clean our act up in the second half of the year.
Well, gentlemen, you've more than deserved a well-earned break coming into the summer shutdown, as they call it, with 2.5 weeks or whatever we have off. I think we're already going to enjoy that. So I wish you a good rest and continue the super hard work and great performance yet to come for the rest of the season. So thanks for joining us again, Hal, from Brixworth.
Pleasure.
And James, we'll carry this on after the summer break. Enjoy, guys. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Cheers. All the best. Bye-bye.